Hello, everyone. My name is Trayonna Barnes, and I am here to present to you Heavy Healing Self-Care within the Black community. So just a little bit on how this presentation will go, the flow of the presentation. I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. I'll give you a brief history on mental health within the Black community. Then we'll go over the importance of self-care and what is self-care. And then we'll talk about tips and how you can implement self-care into your daily activity. And I'll also leave you with some contact information. So, a little bit about me. I am from Cincinnati, Ohio, the Queen City, home of the Cincinnati Bengals and Skyline Chili. And for my bachelor's, I moved over to Kentucky, where I received my bachelor's in integrative studies from Northern Kentucky University. I studied social work, entrepreneurial studies, and organizational leadership. And from there, I went to Washington, D.C., where I recently received my master's in social work from the illustrious Howard University. And I am so excited to speak with you all today. So before I get into the history, I want to speak about Dr. Uchenna Umah. She is a former San Antonio, Texas physician that gives a brief summary of mental health amongst the African American community and how it was viewed and treated by the American medical community from the antebellum period to today. And she gives a lot of information. I will not be able to cover it all, but I wanted to give you her name just so that you can go back and go into depth about the information that in her research that she presented. So just to get right into it, before the 1700s, there was really no information about the conditions of Black mental health and how, what issues were affecting the Black community, most likely due to slavery. But it does start to show up in the 1800s. In fact, in 1848, John Galt, a physician and medical director of the Eastern Lunatic Asylum in Williamsburg, Virginia, stated that Blacks are immune to mental illness. We know that this is not true. However, Galt and a lot of other mental health physicians, mental health clinicians, and physicians of that era really did believe that. And along with that, other antebellum medical researchers came up with diagnoses such as drapetomania, which was a disease that caused enslaved Blacks to flee from their plantations, as well as, bear with me, dysthesia. This is a disease that they believe caused a state of dullness and lethargy within African Americans that were enslaved. We would call this depression. Dr. Samuel Cutright, a pro-slavery physician, decided that severe whipping would be the primary form of treatment for these mental illnesses. So instead of linking the severe depression or other psychological ailments that African Americans were experiencing to the direct mistreatment and torture, they made it an intrinsic problem with African Americans. They blamed them for their conditions instead of blaming the conditions that they were in, making mental illness a very bad thing, making it something that you did not want to experience, as you would be punished from whipping. And they purposely made it to where it would make your life harder. And before they even acknowledged those two diseases within African Americans and Black and brown people at the time, they even believed that African Americans were not sophisticated enough to experience things like depression and anxiety and schizophrenia and all the other forms of mental illness. And unfortunately, we have adopted this same kind of reality for ourselves as African American, and it shows up today with statements such as "it doesn't happen to us." we it doesn't happen to us. We're strong. We don't experience those things, or we can pray it away. We experience that a lot within our community. So I want to start by saying Black mental health matters. Your mental health matters. A lot of the stigma that comes is formed around Black mental health, it can be traced directly back to slavery. With them believing that Black mental health wasn't a thing, or that Blacks weren't sophisticated enough to develop things such as anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders, it really takes the humanity away from African Americans. So you can see that restoring Black mental health is literally restoring Black humanity. So that's why this topic is so important to me, specifically in other clinicians, Black clinicians. So, getting to restoring Black mental health, the first step, the basic step is self care. There are other elements, but just basic mental health and restoring that humanity would be teaching Black people that they are deserving of self care and what self care is. So, let's just start with the definition. A definition of self care is the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress. So you deserve to take care of yourself, and in fact, self-care is a part of self-preservation. What does self-care look like? Self-care looks like going to therapy. I would be remiss as a therapist to not tell you that the first step of self-care is going to therapy. Um, it is the best form of self-care. Self-care also looks like finding things that you enjoy. So I always tell my clients, this is what is your inner child want? When you were a child, what were those things that you did? Did you journal? Did you like to play basketball? Did you like to skate? I personally like to dance, so I love my Zumba classes. Um, I tell them to find those inner things. Did you like going to the park? Go to the park as an adult. What's wrong with that? I like to tell them to find those things that they enjoyed as a child. Self care also looks like spending time with people that love and support you. It looks like a healthy meal, making yourself a healthy meal, or a meal that you really enjoy that makes you happy. Self care also looks like rest. So within the Black community, I love to tell Black people to rest, because that is one thing that also goes against a lot of stereotypes in the way that we think as African Americans. We tend to think that we don't deserve rest, that we can't rest, that we shouldn't rest. And I am here today to say that we can rest and we should rest. So, self care also looks like rest. That can look like taking a day off, that can look like a vacation, that can look like sleeping in, or it can look like taking a nap. Self care also looks like removing yourself from unhealthy people, places, and things. When conflict resolution fails, it looks like saying no when realizing that you're overextending. I'm not saying don't help people. We need each other. We need to lead on each other, and it's okay to help people when you have it. But when you are barely staying afloat and someone asks you to do something extra that you believe will send you into a state of distress, it's okay to say no, no matter who they are. It is okay to say no. Um, Self care also looks like setting boundaries and maintaining those boundaries when conflict resolution fails. So I keep coming back to when conflict resolution fails, because I want to point out that sometimes I think we get into this state of cutting things off just because they're hard. And when you have a person that is willing to work with you, that is kind to you, but they simply made a mistake, conflict resolution can be the um, response, instead of cutting them off, as I think that we do a lot, and we unintentionally lose bad relationships. But if this person is still being toxic or harmful to you after you have tried all of the conflict resolution skills, absolutely set that boundary. Self care also looks like being gentle with yourself. when you make mistakes. We are human, we will make mistakes. It is okay. So even in the self-care journey, you will make mistakes. Just remember that you're human just like anyone else. You will make mistakes and that's okay. Be gentle with yourself. Lastly, therapy. Once again, therapy is a good form of self-care because it helps you heal past traumas and it helps you unlock the it helps you unlock the best version of yourselves. So for any mental health clinician or therapist, we will always be just overly excited to see you develop into the person that you can be, um, despite the trauma that you've been through. So I always tell people go to therapy because it truly does unlock the best version of yourself and it's a great form of self care. So, how to implement self care into your everyday routine. So, one way is a self care bag. So, back to the inner child. So, when you're in a good state or when you're with your therapist, sit down and figure out what are those things that you like to do when you were a child. Did you like to skate? Did you like to journal? Did you like to play football? Did you like to dance like me? Did you like to jump rope also like me? Write those things down and put them in a jar. When you are in a bad state or you feel like you need to give yourself a little bit more self care and a little grace, pull one of those things out and do it for that day. That is a good way to implement self care. And I also want to mention that you want to focus on your mind, body, and soul when focusing on self care, as they all need special attention. So, the things that I'm listing are just a few, but it does focus on each area. A coping skills bag. So, I do this with a lot of my clients that are in a time where they're experiencing a lot of stress or they're experiencing a lot of anxiety. So I get a little bag that they keep with them at all times. And it has, if you like to journal, it'll have a little journal in there. If you struggle with anxiety and you like to fidget, it'll have like a little rubber band in there, something for you to fidget with. Have something, if it's a picture of somebody that brings you a lot of comfort, put them in that coping skills bag and just carry that around with you when you need to implement those self-care um, you know, items or skills. Also, take a walk. This is your physical health. Make sure that you keep your body moving. That's a good way to take care of your physical body. Also, deep breathe and stretch. Another way that we can take care of our physical bodies is relieving the stress that is in our muscles. I don't think that we realize how much stress and tension we hold in our bodies. So, a good way to relieve that is to engage in activities that relieve it, such as yoga and stretching. And for the soul, I always say meditate, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's going outside and communicating with the earth, rather that is praying, rather that is going and looking at the stars. I love to look at the stars. That's my favorite thing. And just take time to really soothe your soul in that way. So these are tips that I give to my clients, and I also want to extend them to you. Along with those services, you can go ahead and follow me on all of my social medias if you want to continue this conversation about self care within the Black community. Also, dive into the history a little more. I know we didn't have as much time on this platform, but I definitely want to continue this conversation. And I'm so excited and so grateful that you invited me here today. All right. Have a good day. Bye bye.